You've probably told yourself before, I know they're not good for me, and I know I should be over this by now, but still you're stuck and you're spiraling and you're caught in obsessive thoughts or in waves of anxiety over your desire to be with this person. And deep down, you're actually still hoping and still hooked on the idea that maybe somehow you could still have them in your life. But what if this isn't really about the person at all? What if what you're chasing isn't them, but the feeling that this person gave you? Or even the version of yourself that you saw reflected in their eyes? Because sometimes the people we can't let go of, the ones we latch onto with intensity and obsession, they're not the answer. They're just mirrors. And what we're really craving is the missing part of ourselves, or something that's been missing in our own lives for a very long time. Hi, I'm Madalena, and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk about how to take our lives back from the lasting effects of childhood trauma, of anxiety, and of emotional dysregulation in general. And we do this because we want to take our lives in our hands and live on our own terms. And today we're talking about something that's hard to admit and quite hard to see sometimes, especially when we're in pain. Sometimes the person you can't stop thinking about, this person is just a mirror, not of your desires, but rather of your frustrations, of lacks in your own life, and many times of your own shame, rooted in those deeply held beliefs that you're somehow unworthy of love. And most often, limerence is a mirror of your deepest unmet needs. Let's talk about how this all connects to limerence. Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much. Your obsession is probably just a cover. Limerence often looks like we're hooked on a person, and we are technically. Limerence is an addiction to another person. But what if underneath that, we're actually hooked on the feeling of what that person seems to offer us? At some point, especially when we've already passed through the dark and muddy trenches of limerence, the worst parts of it, and we've come out on the other side, finally able to take a breath and smile again, when we come up for air and we can see things clearly, we often notice something surprising. The person was a sort of placeholder, a stand-in of sorts for any number of things we lack in our own lives. And this can be any number of things. It can be freedom we don't feel ourselves, or freedom we don't feel we have the right to ask for in our own lives. Sometimes it can be power or recognition that we haven't yet claimed for ourselves. Or maybe we just want to be seen, to be recognized for who we are, for what we do in the world, for our talents, for our gifts, for the things that we're good at. Sometimes it's the emotional openness the other person seems to offer us. And maybe when we can't figure out how to access that part of ourselves without the help of another person prompting us, we seek it outside. We chase the person because it's easier than admitting what we're really chasing. Because once we admit to that, it forces us to ask the next question. Why are we selling ourselves short? Why are we not working to make our lives look the way we want them to look? And this is one of the big reasons that limerence is so much more common in midlife, because that's the turning point for so many of us, right? It's the moment when we look back at the first half of our lives and we ask ourselves, are we where we were expecting to be at this point, right? Have we accomplished all the things we wanted to accomplish? Are we still on the right path? In almost all cases of limerence, the limerent episode itself is a disguise for a real hunger that's lurking underneath in us. And honestly, it's one of the best opportunities you'll ever have to look under the hood of your own mind and to ask yourself these questions, like, what's actually missing in my life that brought me here to this point? Because when your life doesn't feel like it belongs to you, when something is missing at the core, then limerence becomes a kind of fantasy portal through which we can step, right? And in that portal, we get to explore the untapped parts of ourselves. Because if we're real, half the time we don't even know this person we're limerent over very well. There's so much projection involved in limerence that the real person is often a stranger to us and is hiding under many, many layers of our own fantasy of them. We feed mostly on that fantasy that we have of who the other person is. So what we're really falling in love with is not them. It's a version of ourselves that perhaps we imagine we could be if we could only keep this person in our lives, right? Because it feels like this person holds the key to a part of us that we just don't know how to become, or we don't know how to access. Sometimes a limerent object represent things that become obvious to us when we look closely. Things like a lifestyle that we're afraid to pursue ourselves. Maybe they're creative and spontaneous, or they're unbothered by rules while our own life feels rigid and small and locked down in some way. Maybe they have a kind of emotional expression that we were never allowed to have ourselves. Maybe they're emotionally raw and open and you were taught to keep it all in. Maybe they have a kind of sexual expression that we're not allowing ourselves to have. Maybe this person is flirtatious and free and embodied and you feel shut down or ashamed in that part of yourself. Maybe they have a sense of freedom or self-possession that we don't know how to get access to ourselves. Perhaps they seem unbothered by the judgment of other people and we ourselves are drowning in perfectionism or people-pleasing. And instead of grieving the absence of these things in our own lives and spending our energy on figuring out how to unlock those parts of ourselves, we fixate on the person who seems to have them. Because if we can claim this person, maybe we can keep the feeling that they awaken in us. Maybe we can finally access that part of ourselves through them. But that's a trap, and it's a dangerous one, because what we really want is to be whole. And we don't need that limerent object for that. That we can do on our own. If we don't realize that, we can keep chasing limerent object after limerent object. This is about you. And that's not a bad thing. In fact, that's the good news of this whole thing, because at the end of the day, that's just about the only thing you do have control over. You can't control how much time or attention or affection another person is willing to give you. You certainly can't control whether someone else can or can't love you. You can't control who wants to invest in you and who doesn't. You can't control another person's honesty or integrity in their connection with you. But what you can control is how much you're willing to invest in yourself. And we're not talking about blaming ourselves or shaming ourselves for connecting to people in this way. What we get out of it is that after such an intense experience, we have an opportunity to really look at ourselves so that we can free ourselves. Because once you realize that your obsession is not just about the person, that it's about a part of you that's been cut off from something, then something in you opens up. You don't have to keep stalking this person's social media. You don't have to keep replaying conversations in your head that you've had with them. And you definitely don't have to keep wondering if this person is your soulmate. They're not. That's why you experienced this episode of Limerence in the first place with them, because they're not your person. Something about your connection with them was not stable and safe and conducive to a good relationship. Instead, you can turn that attention to yourself and ask, what did this person represent for me? What was I actually hungry for? And how can I give myself some of that now? You're not crazy, but most of this was never really about the other person. This was about a part of you trying to wake you up. The part of you that wants more from your own life. And that part of you deserves your undivided attention and your obsession even. The way you give it to people that you become enamored with, right? That part of you may be tired of being ignored. So don't chase limerent objects. Chase that. That's what will give you that lasting satisfaction and the payoff that you're actually looking for. If this kind of content appeals to you, consider subscribing. I'll see you in the next one.